Hey guys, it's Sarah here. In this video, I'm going to be going over anion gap. This is quite confusing for a lot of people, and I'm really just going to dumb it down in a really short video. So let's get started. So before we go into what it is, I just want to let you know that the normal range is 3 to 11. Obviously, this could differ depending on the lab, 4 to 12, etc., but for the most part, 3 to 11. So let's get started on what an anion gap is. Now, in order to really understand this, you have to think about your electrolytes as being positively and negatively charged. They are positively charged, called cations, or negatively charged, called anions. So for your positively charged, your cations, you have potassium and sodium on one side, and for your negatively charged, you have chloride and bicarb, and some other ones, but mainly chloride and bicarb. So if you put it on a scale or think of a battery, you want it to be neutral. Sodium and potassium on one side, chloride and bicarb on the other side. But like I just said, there is some other ones that are anions on the chloride and bicarb. For instance, lactic acidosis, ketoacidosis, etc. These are all ones that are included in the anions. They're smaller, so they don't amount for that much as chloride and bicarb, but they still are on that side. So what happens is you don't have an equal scale over there. It shifts a little bit. So that's where you have a gap, a difference, a gap, an anion gap. The anions are going to be a little higher than the cations because of that. It's not equal 2 against 2, it's 2 against 2 plus a little more. So what it is really measuring, the anion gap. So what the anion gap is really measuring, it's really measuring the difference or the gap between the positively charged and the negatively charged. And that's why it's so easy to calculate on your own. So what you do to calculate it, it's a simple equation. It's just sodium and potassium, like we said, those are the cations. You add them, and then you subtract them from the anions, which is chloride and bicarb. And that would give your anion gap. So, for instance, if sodium is 140 and potassium is 5, that's 145. And if chloride is 100 and bicarb is 20, that's 120. So you have 145 minus 120, and that equals 25, which is above the range. And basically, if it's above, if it's high, we don't really discuss low because it's like so uncommon. But if someone has a high anion gap, that means that the other small ones, so we said on the negative side is chloride and bicarb, and some other ones, the other small ones like the lactic acidosis, etc., are a lot more, so you're having a high gap. They're more than they should be. So basically, is that the anion gap is the difference between the positive and the negative. If it's high, that means there's more of the other ones that shouldn't be that high. The other ones consist of lactic acidosis, which is elevated in shock, etc. Ketoacidosis, which is elevated in DKA. Formic acid, which is methanol. And oxalic acid, which is ethylene glycol. So if you're having a high anion gap, it could be for those reasons, like lactic acidosis is too elevated, ketoacidosis is too elevated, etc. So I'm just going to say it one more time, just, so it gets in. So basically, anion gap is a difference between the positive and the negative. In general, there is a little bit more of the negative, so that's why there's an anion gap, which is normal to have between 3 to 11. If it's a lot elevated, so the small little other ones like the lactic acidosis, etc., are counting for way more than they should. And then the question is why? Is it because they're in lactic acidosis and they're in shock? Is it because of ketoacidosis, because they're in DKA, etc.? Well, obviously that you take into account with everything else and the patient's history, the physical, and all the other labs. So I really hope this helps you understand it, and please like and subscribe. Thank you.